Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our meeting today. We are going to go ahead and get started. Two of our board members are not going to be with us for at least the first portion of the meeting tonight, and they'll be joining in later on. So we will expect Ms. Smith and Mr. Jordan at some point later on today. So without further ado, Dr. Boone.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Gabriel, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. In today's workshop, one of the items that in our continued rollout of state data as they are released, we want to share some information regarding the on-time graduation results. So from the senior leadership team, we have Dr. Karen Bailey, Ms. Jackie Chavis, Dr. Michael Cataldo, and Mr. John Coleman, who will also be in support of this presentation. We have previously provided the information to the board, and at this point we're going to do some more discussion of the analysis and what we know about that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Bailey.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Boone, and good afternoon, Dr. Gabriel and members of the board. We're at that time of year where almost all of the accountability measures have been shared and discussed. In previous presentations, we have shared with you information about state and federal accountability systems that have similar measures for our schools and districts. And so graduation rates is one of those measures, and we will briefly share those results and information also about the new profile of a graduate. I also would like to introduce Ms. April Harmon. She is our Senior Coordinator of School Counselors, and she's with us today to answer any questions as well. Okay. We're going to start with a numerical profile of a graduate. Certainly the term profile of graduate was created by the Commonwealth of Virginia, and looking at different ways to view and illustrate skill sets of students in the main content areas of content knowledge, workplace skills, community and civic responsibility, and career planning. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later in this presentation. Moving on to our chart of graduation over time. I would like to explain to you that this is based on a cohort of students. And that cohort of students are students who enter the ninth grade for the first time in a given year, and then they graduate 4 years later. So information is collected on them from their very first year in ninth grade and to the fourth year, and then we look at what happens to them in that fourth year, whether they graduate or are still in school. So we have our 5 high schools, the district and the state. And so, for example, if we look at Booker T, the first-time ninth graders for 2012-13 graduated in 2015-16. And we in the district refer to that as the cohort group of 2016 or 15-16. And they had a graduation rate of 82%. If you look closer to the bottom of the chart, you have the district and the state, so that you can compare our performance over time with the state. For the most part, we have a gap of roughly 9 or 10 percentage points. In one specific year, the ninth grade year of 2012-13, there was a 6% gap. And so that particular cohort of students, for some reason, was quite different, and we were able to graduate more. So the makeup of the ninth grade cohort for the graduating class of 2018, 82% graduated, 4% are still enrolled, 9% were categorized as dropouts, and then probably less than 1% were on long-term absences. And long-term absences are those students who have an illness that is going to extend for a long period of time. However, they are expected to return back to school. It also includes those students who are long-term suspended and are expected to return back to school. Now, the makeup of those graduates and the type of diplomas that they receive. The majority of our graduates received standard diploma, 55%. You can see that we also have advanced in IB and applied studies. modified standard diploma is no longer being recorded for our students, and I think just about all of them have phased out. We may have like a handful still. And what kind of plans do our graduates have after they leave high school? I would say roughly about 78 to 81% over time. Most of our students have some form of educational plans, which includes college and attending universities. 9% of our students indicate that they are going into the military. And this information is self-reported by students to their counselors. So I believe the counselors meet with their seniors 2 or 3 times during the last year, and they collect this information during the spring of the year. In keeping in alignment with the school board's accountability plan, we have broken the data out by race and ethnicity. And so you can see that you have a 2-year snapshot looking at multiple, which is multi-race. They increase 81% to 88%. And that is the percent of that ethnic group, that race or ethnic group. So here you can see that 2-year snapshot. Looking at the other set of subgroups, specifically or notably, our students with a disability within the cohort, 82% of those students graduated. When you compare that to the previous year or that previous year's cohort, it was 70%. So we attributed this to some of the work that is being done by multiple departments, specifically our learning support department. I want to call it special ed, but I think it's learning support. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes. And so also I forgot to mention on the previous slide and this slide, we have a benchmark. It says NPS benchmark at 90%. That is a benchmark that was set several years ago. I don't believe we have changed that. However, when we have the discussion about the school board's accountability plan, we could revisit that benchmark. There is no benchmark for on-time graduation rate. However, there is a benchmark for the federal graduation indicator and for the graduation completion index, which is a part of state accreditation. A little bit of information about how we compare to our surrounding districts. You can see that we have a graduation rate of 82%. And a completion rate, and that is the additional percentage points of certificates, GED certificates that are received, added in, is considered a completion rate. So we have our surrounding districts and the state. Okay. And so now I will turn it over to Dr. Cataldo, who will talk about the profile of graduate.
Good evening, Dr. Gabriel, Dr. Boone, members of the board. Thank you. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the profile of a graduate and kind of talk about what that is. It is a framework that's aimed at preparing students to be life-ready citizens with skills and attributes that the state believes is critical for future success of the students. Many stakeholders were involved in developing this profile of a graduate, and the misconception is the profile of a graduate is only for seniors or only for secondary or high school students. It is actually a framework that goes all the way through K-12. The main question that they answer or that they ask in profile of a graduate is, what knowledge, skills, and dispositions should a Virginia high school graduate possess? So those are the underlying questions behind that. The profile does consist of the 5 C's, they call them: creative thinking, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and citizenship. And as leaders, we work to create opportunities for our teachers to build that capacity in the students, and in developing our curriculum as well. We really focus on those 5 C's, and we'll talk a little bit more about those things specifically. Okay, the theory of action, basically I'll let you read there, but it's Norfolk Public Schools students develop their individual potential. They maximize skills for lifelong learning and successfully contribute to a global society. So with that, all personnel within Norfolk Public Schools, really we facilitate an environment that is supportive of exemplary and innovative teaching and learning opportunities in every school, every classroom, every day, for every student with no exceptions. So that's the promise that we make to the community and to the stakeholders for that theory of action. So we revolve many things we talk about, and as we develop curriculum, we look at that theory of action. And we try to incorporate that as much as we can in the whole entire division, so everyone realizes what their importance is, and everyone is providing that level of support to reach those needs of the students. And so, talking about the 5 C's, I'll just go through and kind of talk briefly about each of the 5 C's and what we're doing to meet those needs. The first one is critical thinking. And when we look at critical thinking, the one that I see that really stands out is analyze, synthesize, and apply knowledge. So when we look at our subjects, we demonstrate critical thinking when students are asked to analyze and synthesize text, when they are looking at other critical thinking skills, concepts, looking for relationships to solve problems. Those are all examples of how we use critical thinking and how we develop the curriculum. So we look at the curriculum and then provide teachers with the pedagogy to assist them in instructing that part. In science, we look at experimental design, scientific inquiry, habits of mind. So those are all examples of just what we do with critical thinking as we develop that, and we interweave it in the curriculum from K to pre-K to 12. And next is creative thinking. Developing a cross-disciplinary knowledge and global perspective. Students are asked to demonstrate critical thinking in writing and multimodal presentations, making connections between past and present, as you would do like in a history or social science, representing and describing mathematical ideas, investigating phenomena, developing an understanding and interrelationships with other sciences. Those are all examples of how we use critical thinking, again, when we develop and start looking through the curriculum. With communication, I've kind of highlighted the one here with technology effectively to present information. We're definitely moving into a technology age where, from social media all the way through PCs and cell phones. And so that communication piece is very important, developing students' digital citizenship, what's appropriate to use, how to use technology, and the fact that many times kids or students, they've kind of developed their own digital citizenship without the instruction of adults. So we really look at preparing them for that. But we look at communication, for example, with English, it's a whole strand. There's a whole strand that is devoted to communication in the English curriculum. Again, multimodal presentations, demonstrating fluency within the subject area, developing products orally as well as in written form, and using logical reasoning and the language of the science or the subject. Collaboration. So here there are multiple ideas here. So listening to and cooperating with others, and also facilitating group discussions, forging consensus, and negotiating outcomes. Those are important key areas of collaboration. We want students to be able to work with diverse groups We want students to exercise civic responsibility, collaborate, compromise, participate in group activities and classroom activities. We want them to participate in discussions. So that's the collaboration piece, and we try to, again, interweave that within our curriculum. And the last one is citizenship. And with citizenship, acting with sensitivity, empathy to individual differences, cultural backgrounds, and with the interests and well-being of the larger community in mind. Working with each other respectfully. Practicing good citizenship skills. Identifying rights and responsibility of citizenship. And then looking at practical situations and scientific concepts, skills, and processes for everyday life. So the citizenship is a key area as well, and I did mention the digital citizenship, which is an offshoot of that. And those are the 5 C's. And you can see here in this representation, the 5 C's go across the curriculum, and they go through each curriculum and curricula, and then as well as pre-K through 12. So it's a fully encompassing part. So when we talk about profile of a graduate, we're talking about a lot of things. And the state does provide instructional and informational sessions on how to best incorporate that. As we move towards more project-based learning, where we're looking at pedagogy surrounding a student and looking at that student level of interaction, as students produce products, we're moving into those 5 C's. By having that kind of work and expectations of the students. Okay, now what you'll see there is a high school academic and career plan. So we have career exploration and planning that we begin in the elementary schools, in the elementary years. Students explore different occupations associated with careers. They look at the 16 different career clusters, and career clusters really go from agriculture to transportation. It's 16 different areas, and then of that, I think you have 79 different career pathways. So it's really very extensive. We begin that in the elementary years, and as students progress through, they meet one-on-one with the counselor. They also the counselor meets with the parents as well, and they develop these plans. And so we have academic and career plan portfolios that we have been doing. And what it does is it provides the student and the parent with information about the student's interests, their values, what their future interests and goals are. And so they have that opportunity to work one-on-one with the counselor and with their parents and get them really involved with that whole process and looking at the career clusters, which are really just groupings of organizations or occupations and industries that students may want to get into those particular fields. So this is just an example of the high school, but we do it in elementary, and then we also follow up in middle school in 7th grade, 9th grade, and 11th grade more specifically. So students, as they are going from one school to another, transitioning from, say, elementary to middle school, they have those meetings, and they determine where their paths are based on how they're completing their coursework.
And if I could interject, I wanted to see there's that 10th grade review. So when you think about graduation, we aren't waiting until 12th grade to see, but there's that mid-high school check-in with 10th grade so that we can see, what else we need to do to shore up the students' course load and credits.
Yeah, they have to go through, they have to meet with that parent and with this counselor 11th grade, 9th grade, and 7th grade. So those are part of it, and it's important that, again, as profile of a graduate, we're not talking about just the high school or just the end of the years. It really is a culmination of many years working together and really developing those skills.
Mr. Klein, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So how would this, with the career planning and exploration, how would it affect a student that goes to the governor's school? And so how does that all work in?
Well, if they chose at an early enough time that they would like to go into a certain area that is focused in the governor's school, then that would be part of their career pathway.
Okay.
So they would just take those courses. It would lead up to what they would need for acceptance into the program.
Cool.
Now here you'll see the standard versus the standard and verified credits, the changes that have occurred between last year and this year with ESSA. So what we see here is the standard diploma. Previously, there were 6 verified credits that a student needed to receive in order to graduate, 6 verified credits. With ESSA, it has now changed to 5 verified credits. So they have 1 per subject in the 4 core, and then with English, they have the reading and writing. So they would get a verified credit, so they would have 5. Now, when we look at the advanced diploma, in the past, they had to receive 9 verified credits. And you see that number has changed as well. That is also number 5, or where they have, again, 2 English, reading and writing, and then they have 1 math, 1 science, and 1 history, social science.
And as a reminder, the English verified credit, it only occurs at grade 11.
Only grade 11, yes.
Okay.
Question, Ms. Campson?
Back from the beginning where we were looking at graduation rates, don't want to interrupt in the middle of the presentation, but I see that the black-white gap that we've seen in all of our data, all of our testing data, is there also in the graduation rates. So, which is very troubling, especially considering we're a minority black school system. My question is, what do we have special in place? I mean, I know we have programs like Access to College, but that isn't working with the kids that are not even graduating. What are we doing to address, thank you, that's it. What are we doing specifically in our high schools to address that? Do they have special counselors for kids, for our African-American children who are in danger of not graduating on time? Oh, I guess I should be asking Mr. Coleman.
Well,
I was thinking Karen, she has all knowledge.
The next 2 slides somewhat addresses that.
It will.
So I'll try to capture your question, through that process.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay. There we are.
So best practices for addressing the cohort students in terms of them graduating on time. We know that a lot, takes place during 4 years of high school. And so it's not usually any 1 or 2 things that directly impacts graduating on time. It's a combination of things, or one might trigger a combination of other things that eventually impacts them in terms of being able to graduate on time. There's a number of things listed here. I'm just going to highlight a couple, but because it's come to the forefront this year with the new accreditation standards and chronic absenteeism now being a component, we know even prior to that change, that our student attendance had to be an area of focus. And so this year especially, it has been at the forefront of all of our conversations when our high school principals get together and with their instructional leadership teams. Attendance is on the agenda each and every month. So they're monitoring it very closely, and at the same time, we're also looking at our practices. Are there ways that we can be more efficient in terms of how we're responding? And one of those pieces is where, increased parental involvement is involved. Parents have to be a part of the process when it comes to student attendance, and they have to value and prioritize the student being in that seat to be able to get that instruction and to stay, with their cohort, academically. Another area that, we've really got a major focus on this year is the extended learning time. And so you'll see under that Grad Point, Night School, Virtual Virginia, Desire to Learn, which is through WHRO. Those are all online or components that will extend instruction, but don't necessarily have to be face-to-face in the building. And so as a result, we're looking again at our practices, our procedures in terms of how can we open up that door more broadly so that students can get involved. With Grad Point, primarily we've used it as credit recovery, but we're also looking at it now more closely in terms of unit recovery, especially now that we're in full year courses. Again, students can recover from a certain part of the school year, by simply redoing units using GradPoint, and that way they can stay academically up to speed. So those are two examples in terms of best practices, and there are others. When you get to action steps or things that we're actually doing in the schools, we have a major focus with our instructional leadership teams in our schools. We're in our third year of working with focused schools as part of our professional development, and as a result, we have now taken that theoretical piece and instructional focus and on our theory of action, and we're now moving it into the schools more directly. And so now we're doing that professional development right in our schools as much as we can, so that leadership teams can learn from each other and be able to address more specifically what those weaknesses are. You brought up earlier looking at subgroups and looking at our black students, our students in poverty, our special education students. We know those are subgroups that we specifically have to focus on. And as a result, we've made some changes this year through our ILT teams, and I believe Ms. Chavis has addressed it earlier with the board. Our school improvement plans require our schools now to have essential actions related to our special education subgroup. So we have a very narrow focus in looking at what we're doing instructionally for our students with disabilities. At the same time, we know that if we can improve that subgroup, we're probably improving other subgroups at the same time. We have not lost focus on our Tier 1 instruction. Our Tier 1 instruction on a daily level is really what is driving it. So we have all of these components that help support that Tier 1 instruction, but if we're doing what we're supposed to do on a daily basis, we should have to rely on these action steps less and less, and our graduation rate should improve as a result. Lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about our graduation coaches are an instrumental component of our high schools. They're invaluable. They follow up in terms of where the counselors provide information in terms of students staying on track. They are the ones that hunt down the students and say, where are you today? In working with this teacher or working with this class. They monitor the students' progress and work very closely with those counselors to make sure that when we get to the end of the year, those students are in a position to be successful and graduate. If they're not, they're making home visits. They're collaborating with agencies, in school as well as outside of school. They are absolutely invaluable to our district. We have a number of other action steps are in place, including open campus and twilight school. All of those pieces support our students making progress in terms of being able to graduate on time.
Is there any recommendation at this point in time to do anything different with our graduation coaches? More supportive measures, add any more, or?
I'll look at the team because, again, one of the things we did was preserve the graduation coaches when the district was notified that they could not stay in the Title II grant. I think they had been in there when I arrived, and so we were notified they couldn't stay in that grant. We moved those to the operating funds primarily so that, again, we preserve that position. Looking at our data, again, part of it, students actually have two sets of counselors. They have the graduation coaches and they have the guidance counselors. And because of that planning piece, they work together in synergy such that we can support kids that are at have the greatest potential to graduate on time, and also at the greatest risk because of some personal issues or whatever else. So with those two adults working very closely, we're seeing and leveraging, I think, that resource in a way that makes the best sense for us. And certainly I'll ask Ms. Chavis or Mr. Coleman if they want to add anything.
When you're talking about resources, sure, if money wasn't an issue, we'd love to have additional graduation coaches. But we also need to make sure that we keep things balanced and make sure our needs are where they need to be. Our 5 graduation coaches, or our 6 graduation coaches, that we are utilizing within the 5 graduation coaches, that we're utilizing within the division are doing an outstanding job. We have the right people in the right positions at all 5 high schools right now, and as a result, they're very effective. Are they busy? Absolutely. Would we like them to be a little bit less busy? Yes. And so working with our counselors, working with our teachers, working with our parents, hopefully we can reduce the number of students that need those direct services. And as a result, that would be the better way to focus, I think, than to just simply add more resources. We need to get to the root of the problem and be able to address that piece. And then I believe, our graduation coaches might be a little bit less stressed, but at the same time, I think we're managing that piece appropriately at this time.
The other thing that Mr. Coleman mentioned, or in one of the other slides that was listed there, was about the parent liaisons, and that's different this year as far as how we are maximizing the supports of the parent liaisons as well as the parent and the attendance clerks at the high school level, because they're now also working at the middle and elementary level through feeders, so to speak, such that we can identify early on any attendance issues that may that may present themselves from early elementary, and that may impact families of students who are also our high school students. They're working at the elementary level, middle level, and high school through our attendance technicians, because the liaisons are also going out to make home visits and to check to see why kids are not in school. So there's an approach to really look at the family situation when attendance issues come up. That in turn will also assist the support of the graduation coaches when they're making home visits and identifying concerns that may come about through families.
Thank you. Ms. Campson, and then Ms. Bassine.
Mr. Coleman, are the graduation coaches working with just seniors, or were they working with 9th through 12th grade?
They work primarily with seniors, but they also work with, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors as well. I believe I've said it before, in previous years, our graduation coaches, really, we need them working with students right when they enter, 9th grade so that we can follow them up. The bulk of the work is with that senior class because ultimately that's the end game. But are we monitoring them, each year? Yes, and that's where the graduation coach can't do it all. And so the graduation coach is more that hub of communication of working with the parent liaison, working with the counselors, that are assigned at the time, working with the administration, working with the parents to make sure that, everything, is aligned in regard to resources and communication.
One quick follow-up, maybe to the counselor that we just were introduced to. So with that kind of need for more support at the lower grades in high school, are the counselors charged with doing some type of keeping an eye on the kids that might be in danger, as you're, kind of supporting the coach?
The counselors, particularly at the secondary level, do give additional support.
Microphone.
Oh,
Sorry.
we should, there.
The counselors, particularly at the secondary level, middle and high school, do give additional support to those who we sometimes call at risk, that need the additional support that they may not receive at home. So typically they get more support and more attention.
Do they have like their own group? Each counselor at the school has a certain group they work with of children?
Counselors, students are assigned to counselors by last name.
Right, that's what I was remembering, but it's been a while since high school, so I wasn't sure I was right.
Not a problem.
So do they kind of track things like the attendance situation, which
They
we know
do,
is-
and typically they are on part of that front line defense where they meet with the students. Typically it's 3 days and 5 days, but the counselors are a part of that team that will meet with them and come up with a plan of improvement to improve attendance.
Okay, thank you. That
You're
was
welcome.
Very helpful.
Ms. Bassine.
I have a couple comments. First, I like your comment about getting to the root of the issue as to why students aren't getting to the point of graduation. And I think a few months ago, and we keep revisiting it as we've been working on our educational planning initiatives, but the feeder pattern, there's a clear pattern there about where a student starts at pre-K and where they end up and what the graduation rate is. So that's something I think we have to keep at the forefront when we do our educational planning work and tackle achievement gaps, because they started early on and they're going to remain where they are at the point of graduation unless we tackle it early and get at the root. I had asked questions about the dropout rate specifically, and at the state level, it clearly, they look at the subgroups, and I was hoping that we could get a look at who our dropouts are, because that's not necessarily the same as those who graduate. So I would like to look at who those students are so that we can get at strategies specifically targeting those subgroups. And then on slides 7 and 8, there's the overview of the types of diplomas. And I would like, from an equity standpoint, I'd like to know, so it's 7 and 8. So of those subgroups, then how many in each of those subgroups received an advanced diploma, standard diploma? Because, as we look at the racial gap, the students with disabilities, are we encouraging or hoping to get more students with an advanced diploma? Because I think our advanced diploma rate is much lower than the state. And correct me, I know last year it was, and this year it looks like it hasn't really moved that much. So I would hope, as we talk about our accountability plan, is trying to get more students achieving or getting that advanced diploma. So that's just some questions I have there.
I don't have an issue if we get that information and a follow-up, and Karen and I discuss that, so we can definitely, Dr. Boone, Karen, are you all okay with that?
Yes, we are aware of the additional data request, and so we're preparing to put a packet together to get to the board members by Friday, by close of business. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. And I had one specific question about the strategies. What's the process of the extended learning time, the different strategies in grad point? Is there a process, are there barriers in place that might be preventing students from accessing it, or what is the process to accessing that extended learning time?
There have been some practices that have been in place for a number of years, and both Dr. Cataldo and I, along with Valerie Ford, who works with virtual learning, we've been discussing and reviewing, some of those practices. Primarily, students can use GradPoint for an initial credit course if they're a senior. And if they're a senior, it's because, they may have come in from out of state or from some other location, and they need an initial credit for a course that they can't build into their schedule, but they need it to be able to graduate. We feel like at this point, we offer and use GradPoint for initial credit in summer school every year. There's no reason why we can't be doing it during the regular year as well, given certain circumstances. And so we're looking at those practices and reviewing so that we can open up and create better access to on-learning opportunities to students. We still want students in face-to-face classes whenever we can. However, we know that there are circumstances that would help facilitate progress for a student in staying on track or being able to move towards that advanced diploma because they can get some other course out of the way to give them access to maybe a higher advanced course, through that opportunity by having the opportunity to take GradPoint as the course, or Virtual Virginia, or Desire to Learn. So we have multiple options that are out there. We just need to find a way to take better advantage of them.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, and so this pretty much concludes our presentation. Certainly, data at a glance, and continuing our practice from prior years' work with the board. We provided this one-pager on the graduation, and that's why it was part of your packet. Should you have to speak to graduation rates or how our high schools are doing and such, you could use this as a point of reference.
Okay. Thank you. So just highlights from the presentation. We have many systems in place. parent liaisons, attendance clerks, graduation coaches, guidance counselors, streamlining those mechanisms so that we can have the biggest impact on the root issues, track students so that by the time they get to the graduation coaches, it's making their job a little bit more easy. And then as far as other data points that are needed, we will get those items with the subgroup breakdown and the diploma types sometime on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is our discussion on the VSBA Association updates. Mr. Clinton, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Chair Gabriel. My colleagues on the board, many of you all should have gotten a copy of the entire Delegate Assembly Handbook for the Virginia School Board Association that was posted on board docs. I just want to bring your attention to the legislative positions, which are located on page 95 of the handbook. I've decided to put the entire handbook up there so that you all had that information. You probably don't have it in front of you, but it's okay. But there are several positions that are in there that are new and some amendments, legislative positions, and I'll just give them by title. And then if there's any questions in regards to them. But legislative position proposal number 9.117, at-risk add-on is a new one. Legislative position proposal number 2, 1.2 is about fair assessments for limited English language proficient students is an amendment to a current position. Legislative position proposal number 3, 10.4 is on school, safe school environments, and that's an amendment to what's currently in the handbook. Proposal number 4, 1.13 is graduation completion index calculation for English learners, which is a new one. Proposal number 5, 918, is to amend the standards of quality to include dedicated funding for mental health student support positions and school security personnel, which is a new one. Number 6, 915, funding for the governor's school, which is an amendment for that one, which pretty much just talks about moving for more funding for full-time versus the shared time like we have here. Legislative proposal number 7, 4.26, is amend the Virginia Code to allow full-time employment for retired Virginia law enforcement officers in school security. Pretty much, as you know, when you retire, there's kind of you can't come back and necessarily work, so they're trying to provide opportunities for individuals who already have the experience as law enforcement officers to be able to come back and immediately start working again in our schools as security officers. Number 8 is modify limitations to restore important contributions to growing school divisions. That's a new one they have there. 9 is on color vision deficiencies and its negative impact on school performance. Number 10, increase student access for internship apprenticeships. And this came from Virginia Beach. And which is most appropriate, as we just talked about, the new career pathways. This is about creating a tax incentive for local businesses to allow them to be able to have our students in their workspaces, and then they would receive a credit back. Hey, how y'all doing? Number 11 actually makes several amendments to what it's already in there, and it's cleaning up some items. So if every year VSBA produces a legislative handbook that goes out, and so if there's any additions or corrections to those things, or if we were successful during the General Assembly and they were passages, they were able to clean those up. So this was what was presented, and my recommendation to you all is that we support this and that we direct the delegate at the Virginia Delegate Assembly for VSBA to be able to vote in favor on behalf of Norfolk.
So let me just provide a little context. Chair, and did you have a comment? Okay.
Did I just
So as a school board, we are members of the Virginia School Board Association, and there are hundreds of school boards that are a member of this association, and we meet annually in Williamsburg for the annual conference, and that's where we all come together and we talk about the things that are important at a local level, and then how can the Virginia School Board Association advocate on behalf of us as a bigger entity in Richmond, in Washington, for the things that we need. And so this document here, which we look at every year, is the document that we have to, as a board, support or add suggestions to. And so if there are any comments that you all have about what is proposed here, it's important that we discuss it because we will be voting on it in November at the annual meeting. All right.
And so, and can you clarify, so you're the delegate and because we're supposed to vote on a delegate and an alternate, is that correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
I interrupted him, but he was going to discuss that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the actual items, action items for the board, later we will actually take a vote on, I know that in the past it's been a custom of the board that typically the chair and the vice chair would serve as the voting delegates, but the Virginia School Board Association in the handbook actually explicitly states that the board should vote on it. And so we want to make sure that we're in accordance with that. And so going forward, this will be an action item that we will take up during our business meeting tonight to vote on the delegate and the alternate. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Oh, I just have one comment, and I'm going to mention this when we talk about our legislative priorities too. Specific, so to 10.1, I think anywhere and everywhere that we can bring specific attention to the opioid epidemic and specifically talking about drug education. I mean, it talks about it in the general sense of what we've been doing. But I think, in states like Maryland, they're passing legislation to specifically address it. And, it's not a matter of if it happens in our school, it's a matter of when. Because the time, what's happening, in the city, in our country, is going to be happening in our school buildings. And so one thing is, I'd like to see us take a strong position on that, on what we're going to do to support our students, not only if they have an overdose, but if they also become orphaned or in foster care as a result of that going on in their homes. So, I don't know where that fits in, but under 10.1, that's the section on substance abuse, but.
But you'd like for something to be added about the opioid. So we have the ability from the actual floor during the delegate assembly. So if we have a particular language that we like to add, we could write that up and the delegate could present it as an amendment on the floor.
Okay.
Would you like to do that?
Yes, like
Okay.
including legislation on having Narcan, the antidote, available in school buildings, which is not currently.
I have to look at that because there isn't anything circulating out right now for that to have the Narcan in and
Not
to
in Virginia.
approve. Okay.
Yeah,
But there are states that are doing it.
There are a number of pilots to do medically assisted treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And they're running some in the Department of Corrections, and they're running some through in a couple of the pilot drug courts.
Mm-hmm.
They're 2-year pilots, and the General Assembly is unlikely to authorize anything beyond that until the pilots are completed.
Mm-hmm.
They want to look at cost, effect, the administrative process, everything that goes with administering the drug. And the sections, just to kind of follow on what Mr. Clanton said, the first 10 items here are actually specific requests. Everything else in the package, the other 39,000 pages, are all position statements.
Right.
Yep.
Yep. So those are just some thoughts.
So I did have a point of clarity within the agenda that I was looking here in our consent agenda. Because I'm looking, let's see here, not close. We've got legislative regulation adoption. Are we, in the presentation that you all are making today, are we approving anything, or are we going to do that in November?
What we would hope to accomplish today is get consensus on what's in there, and then we can clean it up for the next meeting. And in the meantime, you may have something else that hopefully you won't, but we'll have nailed it down. But if something else pops up, we can slip that in too.
So I'd like to make an amendment then to the agenda, the consent agenda, 5.06, and change that to adoption of the Virginia School Board Association's delegate handbook proposal. That would also include the the position statements, the actual legislative policy, as well as the nomination committee's report.
Can you restate that, please? So your recommendation is to add,
Pretty much to adopt the Virginia Delegate Assembly handbook.
okay.
And I'm just pointing out the things, the actions that are taking place, because I don't think there's any bylaw amendments this year. So it would include the position statements as well as the actual proposals.
And to wordsmith it a little bit, we would say, add a statement in you all's package that says, the Norfolk School Board supports the legislative requests and position statements of the Virginia School Boards Association.
Great. And also in the handbook, it has a slate of officers for the Virginia School Board Association. So I'd also like for that to be in the consent agenda item, so that we're taking all care of that at one time. Okay.
Great. Okay. So now on to our legislative priorities as a school division. So we have 2 members on our legislative committee, Ms. Martin, Mr. Clanton. We have several support members from the administration, Dr. Birdsong, and then we have Advanced Strategies with us today. So would you all like to go ahead and start with the discussion of our legislative priorities?
Has everyone received a copy of the draft?
Yes.
Did you all have a chance to read it? Because I don't want to read it to you if you've already read it. You have. Good. Good. Okay. How about any questions on the VPI, the very first priority?
This was in there last year, and it's one that Senator Spruill put in budget amendments for us to try to implement, but we weren't able to get them passed.
The other context piece for this too, as we talked about when you were here before, is the fact that Norfolk School Board has implemented a mixed income,
Right.
a diverse income.
Right.
And so again, this gives us better flexibility. The challenge with VPI is at that lowest band, and we have so many families right on the fringe, and so that's the band that we identified as being a target group to help move more students in. And so any flexibility would allow us, again, to continue to look into that band in case the questions come up.
And Dr. Bennett, if you or your staff have any additional explanatory stuff we could put in here, that'd be great.
Yeah. And I was trying to pull up last year's priorities, because we did talk about that as part of our discussion around, we know that socioeconomic diversity is our goal, and so we should have that language throughout as, so when we're talking about VPI and expanding seats and having that flexibility, I think that language should be there, and that's my
What we can do, Ms. Basine, is we can work on getting that language in there, but talk about why we want that language in there.
Right.
So
And
what
I
is the
think
data behind the mixed income efforts that we're trying to move towards?
And I think you all have that from, that we've shared and we've talked about before as well, and there's more of it, but with the same underlying recommendation.
Sure, we'll take a look at that and see what we can incorporate into this year's. Thank you.
So since Senator Spruill introduced us, is there a bill for this year that is going to?
It would be a budget amendment. All this is spelled out in the budget.
Okay.
And so he'd draw a budget. He'd ask the Senate Finance staff to draw a budget amendment and provide, and that budget would also not only change the language, but also would provide the additional monies needed to cover the cost of the change.
Okay.
Yeah, when you all pass this, then we can start looking
Okay.
at who would be the patron and
Great.
who would put it in, who would
Okay.
submit it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I forget, sometimes we've got a lot of new members. Once you all pass this, we have our breakfast or our meeting with the delegation. We will then meet individually with members of the delegation and ask them to be the patron of bills that are in the request part of this, or budget amendments for us.
And some of them have been done last year, so we'll decide either to go with the same patron or a different one, figuring we may be more successful, or maybe a couple different ones, which is interesting. Okay, the re-benchmarking was funded in 2018, so we don't have to do that again. The true cost of public.
Does everybody understand what re-benchmarking is?
Probably.
Let me do a real little 30-second update. Every 2 years, the state basic aid formula is considered a black box, but it's actually not that complex in the concept. It's the average daily membership multiplied times the basic times the prevailing cost of items that are required in the standards of quality times the composite index. Now, where the state shortchanges you are in the things that they require in the standards of quality. So, but the prevailing cost, every 2 years, the state goes back and looks at this prevailing cost, which are the statewide cost, the average statewide cost. And in every introduced budget every 2 years, an adjustment is made based on the increase in that prevailing cost, and that's referred to as re-benchmarking. And generally, it results in about $300 to $500 million in additional funds for public education every 2 years, just to meet cost increases. And that's not all cost increases, obviously. It's only the cost increases required by the standards of quality.
And they haven't always funded that, so.
That's true.
So we were happy to get that last year. Okay, the true cost of public education, we had this in last year, but JLARC had already determined 3 different surveys that they were going to do, and that was capacity for them. So this year, we're hoping that we might be able to be more successful with that.
And there's a groundswell of cities in particular that are pushing for a combination of the JLARC study and pointing out that to look at the true cost of public education. I know the Richmond City Council has passed an ordinance that they're circulating to other city councils in support of that, and so there's a growing, the termites are in the woodwork.
Okay. Ms. Bassini, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just, so where does, in all of this, and we know in several states there were teachers protesting because of teacher pay, and our state, we know, is, at the bottom. What are we doing in our legislative priorities to also make that a top priority, is to not just, a pay raise, but really to examine teacher salary and to increase teacher salary?
It gets to the heart of the education funding model.
Right.
If the state gave you money for a 10% teacher pay raise, you couldn't afford it. Because it's pushed through the composite index, and so the local share, and it would only be for SOQ mandated instructional personnel. So think about all the folks outside that world who are not SOQ mandated, your bus drivers, your cafeteria workers, your janitors, your librarians, all those folks, you'd have to pay 100% of that cost. And based on your composite index, for every dollar you get from the state, you would probably have to put, what, Dr. Boone, about 30 cents? Is it that much? Okay, 30 cents. So you can do the math and see it will cost you a lot of money. And so it gets to the VEA does a good job, and we work really closely with Kathy Bircher at the VEA, does a good job of beating the drum about that. But when it comes down to the actual school division, because of the composite index and that the state's only paying for the SOQ instructional personnel, you don't get that. You wind up paying more than you're getting.
Right. When the state gives teachers a raise, we end up paying more.
Right.
But I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
Tanya, about just the global thought process of where do we value our teachers.
Right.
And if you value our teachers the way you say during campaign rhetoric, then show us in the budget.
Right.
And that's what I have heard from a lot of the folks. I know that Governor Northam definitely values doing something about teacher pay and where we value it. So, but I hear that, again, going back to the root.
I mean, what is the state's contribution?
And if we
when
go
they
back
get
to,
that?
and if we go back to page 4 in our position statements, we've got a section there on adequate instructional staff, and pay raise is one of the items addressed in there.
Right. Yeah.
Dr. Boone?
That would be part of
In terms of the groundswell around teacher pay, teacher compensation is also coming up in several different entities. There was a pre-teacher shortage summit, with the summit actually being on Tuesday, the governor's summit on the teacher shortage. Also, Monday at the joint House and Education Committee's meeting conference that they had, several of the presentations talked about teacher compensation as part of that issue of recruitment and retention of staff. So it's certainly being discussed in several places, and that I'm glad to see that if it's on page 4 for us, that there is something there, because it puts us in a place of already supporting those various entities that are raising the teacher compensation piece to the top.
And the VAST conference is actually ending early on Tuesday, so we can all go to the similar seminar with UVA on teacher retention.
That's the governor's summit, yes.
Great. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on what we have before us?
This non-public school student participation under opposed. My concern is, and just that we have a large homeschool population here in Norfolk. So they're residents of Norfolk. They take the state accreditation, all of the examinations, and even some of them use the schools to take those tests and to stay compliant. And so I'm just wondering, how does this impact those students? Are those students?
Yeah, the operative language is in the third line there. Unless those students are held to the same standards as students enrolled in our public schools.
Okay, so I'm just asking, are those the standards that you're talking about in here?
Yes.
Okay. And is it? Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Particularly the issue in a lot of divisions, especially if you get to Northern Virginia, is participating in your attendance zone, because you get some people will shop for where they want their kids to play in athletic programs. And it's referred to as the Tebow bill because of Tim Tebow. And in Florida, you could go wherever you wanted, and so you had private schools and public schools that were actually recruiting homeschool kids to play on their football teams. They're building football powerhouses.
I don't know what kind of homeschool kids they have, but the homeschool kids here are pretty, they're
But yeah,
not huge athletes.
But yeah, Florida,
Maybe
and we have John and I have friends who are homeschool, several friends who homeschool their kids.
They were
And
national
in the Richmond area,
champions,
there's a big athletic program for homeschool, just for homeschool kids, and they play in they won a national football championship for the homeschool kids.
Okay.
Yeah, they do have their own. But the concern with that is too that everyone who participates is coming out of your budget. And it's, so therefore, if it goes on to the state level, it's an unfunded mandate.
Right.
The next one on CTE dovetails with one that Mr. Clanton covered from Virginia Beach about high school apprenticeships and a tax credit for that. And I will tell you, based on this was in our package last year, and this really excites Senator Wagner. This is Senator Wagner's thing, and he
There were
was
actually several of them.
yeah,
that
and he
were
was real
excited
supportive
about
last year,
this.
and he tried to get us some additional. I think we did get some additional money out of it last year out of his budget for the Career and Technical Center.
All right.
On that item, there have been discussions over the last couple of years regarding the Go Virginia, and I know we reference the support of the regional cooperation with this, and at one time when Go Virginia was getting stood up, there was some effort about whether or not Go Virginia could support the type of effort that we have on the planning table for the comprehensive CTE school. It's like I read something recently that may indicate that there's some possibilities there, but I would just recommend, to the extent that the Go Virginia legislation or enabling legislation can allow for direct support of comprehensive and career technical high schools, that that we look at that and consider that, especially in light of the work that we're trying to do here in Norfolk.
Have you all had any conversations with the people, staff in the Go Virginia effort in this region?
I don't know if it's been recent. I know last year there have been some conversations about it, but I'm not sure where it is recently. And also, part of that could also tie into the support for exiting military, as we were also looking at our model allowing for adults to come to the comprehensive CTE school and receive services as well. So there may be some leveraging there that we can update since we originally put this language together.
We'll do a little work on that.
Yeah, we can check into that. Next is the lottery funds. And of course, we would like to get 100% of the lottery funds. But last year, they brought it up to 40. And we were happy with that. And now it's coming up, what we'd like to see is 50%.
A little quick history is when the lottery was passed, there was the proceeds from the lottery were not reserved for any reason, for any purpose. They went to the general fund. A few years later, a constitutional amendment was passed designating lottery funds for the education. What the General Assembly actually did was used lottery funds to supplant a like amount of general funds. So there was no real increase in overall education funding as a result. During the early 2000s, the General Assembly did start saying, carving some of that out, backfilling that with general funds and sending it back, reversing that a little bit, and sending the lottery funds directly to school divisions on a per pupil amount basis, which means it's sent back to you based on your ADM and doesn't go through the composite index.
And there's not restrictions on that.
And well, there were limited restrictions in, but by the time the recession hit, they'd gotten to giving back 40% of lottery funds like that. Recession hit, all went away. Over the last 4 years, the House Appropriations Committee in particular, Delegate Jones has been pushing to get that back to 40%, which the current budget does. They've also taken all the strings off of it. That money can be used for anything you want. Now, what we're recommending here, and it's been in the, it's essentially a revision of what was in the package last year, is that the goal should be to get 100% of funds returned to the local school divisions like that, and in the next year, the short-term goal should be to get to 45%. The next items are all policy positions. And the usual
Unfunded mandates.
yes, no unfunded mandates.
Keep our eyes out for those, and when they rear their ugly heads, we go in and testify for you.
Don't step on your don't step on your autonomy.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Clayton and then Ms. Basine.
Yeah, I had a question in regards to school construction. I know I missed the, because I was at the CUBE conference, the meetings and the sessions that were,
subcommittee.
the subcommittee that was held here.
Same question.
Yeah, same question?
Yeah.
So is there anything that you all have kind of seen on the horizon that will, that anyone's proposing to kind of address some of the things that they've seen from committee, or are we just kind of waiting to Additional.
We
It's
put
a
something
school
here in the position.
Yeah, it's
You mean the renovations of the older
Yeah.
schools
Yeah.
and such?
Let me,
Think-
let me.
Go ahead.
It's school modernization with funds.
Yeah, we
With
should
funds,
put,
yeah.
we should go ahead and put a statement in there,
Yeah.
I think in
They
support
would
of
like
that.
us to support,
Yeah, we should put a
that
statement of
effort,
support.
yeah.
Now, Senator Stanley is proposing issuance of a $3 billion bond issue using the new revenues coming to the state from taxation of internet sales. There are a lot of problems with that. One, I don't think the state has $3 billion in bond capacity right now. Second, the money that everyone thought was going to be $300 million in internet sales tax revenue keeps falling down because the estimates that were originally provided were 256, and the latest is 200. And the Secretary of Finance on Monday cautioned that that number is likely to drop even further, simply because the big internet retailers are already collecting the internet sales tax. If you buy through Amazon, you know you're going to pay the sales tax. And so the amount of actual money we're going to see from that's small. So I think we stay out of the weeds. I would recommend we stay out of the weeds on how that gets done, but that we have a strong statement encouraging state assistance to deal with, and make it clear that it's for repair and replacement of aging schools, not so much to deal with expansion of in the growing divisions. Let's be selfish.
Yeah.
That helps us.
I was going to say, and that would be consistent with one of the items that we just looked at, the VSBA talks about support for school construction, so
Exactly.
that would be very consistent.
I would like, just because this is Norfolk's legislative priorities, the context that Dr. Boone provided for the subcommittee on the average age of our buildings, our elementary, middle, and high schools, I think would be very
Yes.
important for this.
Yes.
So.
And Dr. Boone, if you got those things you could send us, I'd appreciate it.
Great.
Yeah, I'm glad you
You
guys
got the statement in there on charter schools. Essentially, anything that would undermine your authority with regard to charter schools, that's basically all it says. Same thing with virtual schools. Anything that it's not in opposition to virtual schools, but it's opposing any attempt to remove your authority in involving virtual schools. You have a virtual school that's operated fairly well through WHRO. K-12 Inc. has been trying for years to force its proprietary virtual school on Virginia school divisions, and I think they've finally given up. At least at the legislature, for 5 years they hired a big lobbying team to work on it, and we beat them back every year. And I haven't seen them in the last year or so pushing it, but that was that's what was behind that. And then student discipline is opposition to further changes beyond what was done in the last session regarding student discipline.
Maintain local control.
Yeah, to
more than
retain
anything else.
your control to deal with student disciplinary issues. Support side, you want to pick that one up?
Sure. We support schools in challenging environments, which the bullet points below that tell you what kind of funding and what kind of training and professional development for the staff.
There's a lot of specific things that we captured in this one heading in terms of support for.
I'll just speak to that briefly. So that comes from the VSBA Task Force on Schools in Challenging Environments. I co-chair that task force. Part of what's underway right now with the current task force, we have a committee that's gone through and done a preliminary assessment of recommendations that came out of what we called the Task Force Report 1.0, which was done in 2014. As part of that, there's a review that's been done around what actions the General Assembly supported and carried forward as a result of these recommendations, and some gaps in activities that have not been done. So as the report continues to move forward, or the 2.0 report comes forward, there may be some additional recommendations that come forward, and I just ask for us to have some flexibility there, because by the time we get to the session, there may be some recommendations, some updated recommendations that evolve, and we can just bring that forward, to the board to consider. But I just wanted you to know that these are all good and they're all still relevant, but they came out of the 2014 report, and there may be some updates as a result of actions that the General Assembly has taken since then.
Yes.
And we anticipated that, Mr. Jordan, and that the next iteration will be, we take what we did today and update it, and then have another meeting to kind of finalize things before you guys vote. School safety.
Yeah, school safety, there was a task force on school safety this year, and they came out in the House, and they came out with a bunch of recommendations, and we looked through those and chose the ones that we thought would be most applicable to your district.
If they funded all the recommendations, life would be good. There's some really good stuff in here. There's some really good stuff in here.
But these are the ones that, are there any that you guys see that you don't think apply to NPS?
No.
Miss Martin, you were at the conference.
Yeah,
Was there anything?
I agreed with what was discussed. I think we talked about it
Yes.
briefly. You know,
They're all good.
we just need the funding to support them. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I'm in
Definitely.
agreement.
And this, I think the speaker's top priority, it was his commission, but I think his top priority is going to be on the counselors. Funding the counselors.
Okay.
Today, so we, this continued conversation about counseling, Tanya and I were both at the Champions for Children. It's an organization on child abuse, and just talking about how prevalent that is and what the importance of having the counselors be counselors and be able to identify these children. I mean, it's just another situation where we really need to strengthen our counselors and keep them, retooled so that they can stay on top of these issues.
I agree.
Mental health is definitely to the forefront of the General Assembly in their minds right now, as it has been since Cree Deeds, started the initiative to do that. So anything that surrounds that will be received well.
Dr. Boone and then Ms. Basine.
And anything that also comes through will strengthen what we've already put in place in Norfolk in terms of our wraparound services. We're working within existing structures to realign how they support as well as the therapeutic day treatment providers. But we certainly could use the additional resources, and you all also know our trauma-informed care pilot that we have underway. So funds that would come to allow us to expand some of those would be great. And so if testimony is needed, we can certainly talk about things that we have in place and what enhancements would look like for that, and not have to be creating what we would do if we had.
That's right. Ms. Basine?
Yeah, I wanted to tag on to what Ms. Martin said. Speaking to that, I think mental health, big neon sign, we need to have our priority there. I hear it consistently on school visits, how can the board better support, and mental health supports is always, at the top. I'd like us for one day to be a trauma-informed school system where every school, because we know that trauma doesn't discriminate, so it's, I'd like to see that as first and foremost. And again, I'd like to learn more, maybe we can talk offline about the pilots going on, but I was a bit, I'm looking at the recommendations from the House Select Committee on school safety to see that drug education and the opioid epidemic in particular was not, or does not seem to be addressed here. So, we can talk separately on that.
At the time
but-
we had, I was in a meeting early this morning with Judge Fulton, and Norfolk Drug Court is one of the pilots for the medical assisted treatment. And we were talking about how in some jurisdictions it's heroin, in a lot of other jurisdictions it's still pills, and in some of the rural jurisdictions in smaller cities now, it's being replaced by meth.
And the
Which
heroin's
is-
being laced with fentanyl, so it's a very
Not fun to deal with.
But that's something that we can talk more. But I would
Sure,
like
let's do that.
for us, I feel very strongly about it, for us to show support. I know it's not in here now, so it doesn't really fit in that line item. But that is something I don't understand. I'd like to know more about the pilots, but I think it's going to be a fast-moving thing that we have to keep our finger on the pulse.
So just for time's consideration, we'll do one more question with Ms. Martin, and then if there are any other questions with regards to what we have here, I'd like to wrap this up in the next few minutes.
It's not a question, but a statement. Just to wrap this back around to what we are in the business of doing is to have these, to offer a curriculum that focuses on workforce skills. And I think that when we're talking about, our professional development, also tie it back into the curriculum so that we're actually developing future counselors that are aware, and skilled in these areas, because that is also a deficiency from what we heard a lot about today. It's a deficiency, not just, at the college and college level, is that they're not addressing these traumas. They're not training counselors to deal with these. So just want to bring that full circle.
Right.
Quickly for myself here, and it's to Dr. Boone. I know that Ms. Campson has mentioned it before, and hear about school safety, because I've had two parents come to me that have children that are in elementary schools. So is it still that we don't have resource officers in the elementary schools, but they're just like at the middle and high school?
That's correct. We do have a couple of elementary schools. Our K-8, one of our K-8s, two of our K-8s have officers and have security officers, and the 3-8 school has a SRO and a security officer.
So I'd ask that question because I'd like to see something added about.
It's part of the school, it's part of the
Great.
recommendations from the Speakers Commission.
Four, great. So I just want to make sure
That
that
would
was
be in
highlighted.
every single school?
I believe it's to beef up the grant program through the Department of Criminal Justice Services. Right now, they pay for some. The bulk of SRO funding comes to this, is mostly a local responsibility, where you're paying the local police department.
Could I ask you one more question? So is that tied into where I see where they are trying to increase funding, or in the, and also the I think it's in the legislature to do something with police officers who are retired, so that they could they wouldn't be affected, so that because that would be a perfect source for us to get our resource officers for our schools, because I mean when we had the DARE program, we had those police officers in the schools in and out. That was great. And so is that tied in for the same reason?
The issue is if you get retired police officers, if they come back to work on the payroll, then because they're under the VRS, their VRS is suspended because they were back under a covered system. And
If they come back full-time.
If they come back full-time, correct.
So-
But this came out of, the recommendation came out of Prince William County. They're trying to allow them, come up with a way that will allow them to work full-time, because you still got to meet the same, you can't just hire them out of retirement. They've got to continue to qualify in service with their firearms and everything else. And so they want to do it full-time rather than deal with a lot of part-timers. But that's what they're trying to get at.
Okay.
But it's how their retirement compensation is treated.
But at this point in time, we could hire retired police officers part-time
I believe you could.
to do.
I think you
There's,
can.
I think there's a
resources for-
certain number of hours
Right,
with
well, as it-
VRS, yes.
We
and I
can,
don't-
for anything.
Right.
We have fair
We
labor.
can learn more
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
We can learn more about that. And
I didn't mean to
We
hold
can
us up.
bring
I'm
you-
sorry.
we can
You're
bring
trying to
more
wrap it up.
information back to you
That's
about
a
that.
big deal for
Yeah.
me. It's
You're right.
elementary school resource officers is really one of my top things.
Well, I think that this conversation actually was a very good one because it allowed us to focus on some of the things that we want to have our colleagues down here focus on, and then reiterate some of the local needs that we feel are very important. So when we adopt this tonight, in the, should we
We'll
do this?
adopt the VSBA one. We'll come back in November and adopt the the final one.
Okay, will that be enough time for you all?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Practically, you want to have most things nailed down before you have the meeting with the delegation. But you don't have to, if you've got consensus, you're fine. Then
Right.
You don't have to actually have the formal vote until afterwards, but,
Okay.
we're all on the same page.
So takeaways from this discussion then are to add the items that we just discussed here, get that sent back out to the board. Let's do that through Mr. Clanton and Ms. Martin and Dr. Birdsong. get that back out to us, make sure that there aren't any further recommendations that we have set for approval on the consent agenda for November. And if there's any further discussion that we need to have, we can notate that in our meeting.
And this will, I'm sure if I can, this will be the document that we present on the 20th at that event for those.
Yeah, we'll flesh it out.
Yeah. Okay.
And Madam Chair, if I can just make one more point of clarification for our colleagues who just joined us. Under the VSBA part, we are adopting the entire handbook. That's including the positions, legislative positions, including the nomination slate.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Please don't hesitate to let us know if you have any questions or, something's not quite clear.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay, moving right along, enrollment update. Dr. Boone.
Yes, September 30th is one of our two major enrollment reporting and calculation times. And so we had committed to the board to giving you what was submitted and where we are with this. So Dr. Bailey and Mr. Footy will share this brief report.
Thank you, Dr. Boone. Certainly, we're at that time of year where we will talk about enrollment and monitor it throughout the year. However, there's another term that is used with respect to enrollment, and that is average daily membership. And so I just wanted to mention that to you because average daily membership is also calculated throughout the year for various state, local, and federal purposes, and so also to ensure that schools are funded adequately. So, for enrollment, matter of fact, we're finalizing our September 30th enrollment, which is one of our first state reports for the school year. It's not static. Certainly, we look at responsible and serving schools, and this information is used by budgeting to plan for our next year's budget as well as educational resources. Enrollment is impacted by internal factors as well as external factors. Certainly we know about our specialty programs and choice programs to try to attract families into our school district, but external factors such as birth rate, and you've heard Mr. Richter talk about it with cooperative strategies about the low birth rate and how it's affecting enrollment across all districts and states. I'll turn it over to Mr. Fuddy to talk about the projection model.
I believe if you recall Tracy Richter's presentation, he talked about the grade progression ratios as the model that they use and most school districts use as a mathematical way of trying to calculate students that would be arriving the following year. This is the overall model, mathematical model of how that is applied in the district. So essentially what you do is calculate a percentage based upon previous years and then apply that percentage going forward. So there's the example up there that 94.3% of the second grade students in 2016, the ratio that for the number of third graders the following year was 94.3%. So if you apply 94.3% to the 2017-18 second graders, you arrive with a number estimated initial projection of 2,205 students in the third grade. These ratios do change a little bit, but primarily they're fairly stable across the years. What this doesn't take into account are the process to get to a final enrollment projection. And that is later on this fall, we will, we being Cooperative Strategies and myself, will sit down with the city and NRHA and go over what their plans are for residential construction and things throughout the city. Mm-hmm. That then will be incorporated along with some other models, and an initial draft projection will be done probably in December for the budget. Then the work in January will shift to all the principals will receive a draft and their comments would be incorporated, and the final review would be done by all the executive directors of looking at it. So when you get to a final enrollment projection, there's a process that we go through in addition to applying this mathematical model to generate some numbers. Keep going?
Yeah,
Okay.
keep going.
Notice that the 2018-19 number is preliminary. As Dr. Bailey said, that the submission is undergoing right now. Hopefully it will be successful today, but we don't have final numbers yet. Hopefully we'll in a couple days. But as you can see, and also as Tracy Richter has talked about from his live-in numbers, that the enrollment for the district has declined across all of the 3 different grade levels. And as you can see, the largest decrease has been at the elementary grade levels. And the primary driver of that has been the reduction in the number of kindergarten students. And as you can see in the next slide, when you look at the actual grade level, you can see the kindergarten enrollment for each of the 3 years has gone down. But if you look at 3rd grade, you will see a substantial drop between last year and this year. And that was a result of the very dramatic decline in kindergarten enrollment we saw 4 years ago. So that smaller class is now rolling up through the elementary grades and will eventually arrive at 6th grade, which we then will see a decline in the 6th grade enrollment.
Okay.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I?
Yes.
Why was there such a huge increase at 9th grade?
On that graph.
Yeah, why is 9th grade?
Ninth grade is always a larger number of children arriving there. That's always been the case.
Do we know why?
Well, it's students that, what happens is to rise from 9th to 10th grade requires verified credits. Students don't
Okay.
have the verified credits to get to the 10th grade.
So we have a lot of held back kids. Okay, thank you.
They may actually be 10th graders, but they don't have the verified credits to be
considered.
classified as 10th
Okay.
graders. And if you
Just
look across the
looked
state,
odd.
it's the same for other school districts.
Thank you.
Good question.
Okay, here is a comparison between the projection and the estimated enrollment. As you can see, we're going to be slightly under enrollment projections. When we had the opportunity about 10 years ago to invite Dr. Michael Spar in from the Weldon Cooper Center, he reviewed our enrollment projections process. Their goal, he stated their goal should be that we should get enrollment projection within plus or minus about 0.6%. This is a little outside, so my goal always has been about 0.5% or lower. But you notice that the majority of the elementary, as I said, is due to a smaller kindergarten class than what was expected. So we're seeing probably a reduction of the number of kindergarten kids based upon the number of births that occurred 5 years earlier. And you can see this then, this is a percentage of the enrollment difference. Want to be perfectly on track. We want to estimate exactly, but it's a moving target, and there's a lot of external factors, as Dr. Bailey had mentioned, that are outside of our control.
And so from this chart, you can see that we have been pretty much fairly accurate with our enrollment projections, almost 99%, especially for the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so this pretty much concludes our presentation at this time, so if you have any questions.
Mm-hmm. Questions? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so on the next item on our agenda, our grant writer and clerk position discussion, we had some discussion about this at our work session and wanted to bring it back after you all had an opportunity to think about it and see the job descriptions that were out there. Basically, the decision that we have at hand is we have one position. We need to give Dr. Boone direction as to how we want that position filled, whether it is a full-time clerk, whether it's keeping with the suggested grant and clerk position combined, Or a possibility that was brought up in our discussion was allowing that position to be as a full-time grant writer and to continue on with how we are working right now. So with that being said, I'd like to open it for some concise discussion, and then I'm going to do a straw poll as to see where everyone is on this, and then we are going to vote on this in the formal meeting. Ms. Campson?
Well, I'd like to just make a strong urging for a full-time clerk. That's what we've always had in the past. In fact, many times in the past, there was even an assistant in there. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we have someone there with us all the time. I particularly don't like the combination of grant writer and clerk position, because those are two very different skill sets, and we want to get the best person for each job. So even if it was split, which I would strongly oppose, I don't see that combination at all because of the different skill sets. So my recommendation is, let's go with the full-time clerk as we've always had, and Dr. Boone, the budgeting process for next year has already started, so this is something that you could work on for a grant writer for next year. So that's just where I am with it.
Thank you. Ms. Martin?
I agree.
Okay. Mr. Jordan?
No further comment. I've always interpreted that the clerk position was, quote, full-time, and that the board had asked Dr. Boone to look at how to bring on grant writing skills, and so the recommendation was how to leverage it to be attractive to both. So I support that recommendation, but it doesn't. As I mentioned before, I think if we go down the path of separating and trying to get two, then we need to get some recommendation on how we fund it. But I just don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Pacine?
I feel similar because, we had, as being part of the entity that wanted the dual position, I still feel like that's one way to do it. I do think that we should work toward a full-time grant writer because that position would pay for itself. And it's, I think, critically important that we work to have that position. So that's, I still stand at that.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Smith?
No comment.
Okay. Mr. Clinton?
Okay, I agree with with what Ms. Campson stated, that we need a full-time clerk. But I also agree in the respect of what Mr. Jordan mentioned and how we may be able to work within this year's budget to identify getting towards a full-time grant writer for next fiscal year. But as I also stated in the work session, I think that there is some opportunity for collaboration, and that we also look at that maybe a shared opportunity between the city and the school district, and that might be one of the options that we place on as we work towards. But my suggestion is that we move, and my vote would be to move with a full-time board clerk.
Okay. All right. I would support the full-time clerk as well, and I'll just keep my comments brief. That I think that for the items that this board wants to tackle with the speed that it wants to tackle it, that it would set us up for much better success if we have the clerk on board now as we're working through many of these processes, and that way come July, once we're all together as this board and not having to go through any type of transition, we have somebody here who has kind of walked through us during these steps of trial and error as we're going through these items together. So I would be in support of a full-time clerk with always the intention to try to build in the budget, according to Dr. Boone's recommendation, the full-time grant writer, because I could definitely, I have saw that as a need, and to Dr. Boone's credit, she tried to make the best of both worlds and bring this to the board at the time. And this is the position that we're in right now, and I think this would be a good one. So we will come back to this for a formal vote tonight in our formal meeting, so I appreciate that. Okay?
So will there be an update, resolution or something of what we're actually voting on?
So what we're going to be voting on two things. We are going to vote on a direction for Dr. Boone on a consensus to move forward with posting the position as a full-time clerk. And then the second part of that is going to be a motion on the floor to further or amend, I wrote it down, to amend the service date of the role of the deputy clerk from November 1st, 2018 to December 31st of 2018.
So when we say full-time clerk, then we're just going back to what we had in the previous fiscal year? Is that what it's the same?
Yes.
And everything else stays the same, responsibility, reporting, matricing, all that stays the same?
For right now.
Yeah.
Oh. Dr. Boone?
I just had a question, well, a comment. You may recall that even in July, when we went in this direction to continue the work of the deputy clerk, that would still be a recommendation I would make to the board, even with a full-time clerk position, so that, because that currently is a stipend added position, not a separate salary, and only because, lots of things happen, vacations, illnesses, whatever else, so we wouldn't find ourselves without coverage for that position. So something for the board to continue.
So I'm sorry, so if I'm hearing you correctly, that we will maintain a stipend for like someone to serve as a deputy to fill in?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually think that's a great idea, Dr. Boone, because in the event of an illness, we would want someone there who is capable of stepping in should there be an event. And it's a very important position, we can, there wouldn't be any action that we need to take then as a board tonight on that. We can just continue what we have in place already.
Well, I would look to Mr. Cloud. I would think that once a clerk is hired, that at the point that that person is hired, it might be the time that the board would also make whatever motion or action relative to a deputy clerk. And I look at Mr. Cloud to see if that's even close.
That's what you should do.
Okay.
And of course, today's, I forget the deadline, but this is just a limited appointment to continue temporarily.
So they could.
Correct.
Yeah, just for like what would be like the search period, give enough window of time that, between meetings that you could interview, hire, and then come back and make a recommendation.
So that our goal would be to have a new clerk in place in January.
Yeah.
Or
a full-time clerk.
That would be a good goal.
Clerk in place in January. Okay.
Ms. Basine?
So in the discussion we just had, so you're saying that the job duties and reporting will be included as part of our vote?
I'm not touching the job duties right
Okay.
now. I think what we need to focus on is
just the position.
Is just the position right
Okay.
now.
Okay, because I do have questions, comments related to that piece.
Yeah,
At some point will impact potentially.
Well, wouldn't that be included in the job description? We were going to combine the two. Dr. Boone had supplied us with a grant writer one, with the old clerk one, and then with the new, at that time thinking it might be a half-time clerk. Have you already combined that? I guess you probably haven't, because you haven't
Dr.
directed her to.
Well, and that was exactly what I was going to comment on, is that the standalone full-time clerk position description will be updated to the current language that was in the combined position, because one of the things we did as we were developing the combined was recognize that there were some actions that were no longer relevant to that position, and some things that had not been included, such as the utilization of board docs and the technology pieces. So if it's the board's final vote is for the full-time clerk, then we will refresh the standalone position, with those updated pieces that were part of the combined position.
Thank you.
And then move to try to post that by Monday.
And if I can, just for a point of clarity in that, so we have the job description, but I think what Mr. Jordan mentioned earlier was about the reporting structure, which, if I'm not mistaken, is embedded within the superintendent's contract. As far as how that, we're not touching that today. and we'll probably have a conversation at a later date. We just wanted, the most important thing is a full-time clerk, general job descriptions that Dr. Boone will come back, and then we have a much larger discussion about, if there's any potential change in reporting structure, but that's not what's on the table today.
That's not, right. That is not on the table today. Okay. Very good. Okay. Thank you for that. That being said, we are going to go ahead and move into our closed session. Let's get the motion first, and then we can take a break and then come back at 5 to 6. 5 to 6 to do our closed session.
Make it an eat and working session?
Yes, it will be. Is there a motion on the floor to enter into closed session?
Madam Chair, I move that we move into executive session, closed session.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Mr. Butts?
Move that the members of the school board go into a closed session for the purposes that are set out in subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended for discussion and consideration of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, and resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of the Norfolk Public Schools pursuant to subsection 1 of the above cited code section. The subject of this section of the motion concerns a monthly personnel docket. The discussion or consideration of disciplinary and any other matters concerning students in Norfolk Public Schools that would involve disclosure of information contained in the scholastic record pursuant to subsection 2 of the above cited code section. The subject of this section of the motion concerns a monthly student support docket. Consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff members pertaining to actual or probable litigation or the specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel pursuant to subsection 7 and 8 of the above cited code section. The subject of this section of the motion refers to consultation and briefings regarding the matters set out in subsections A and B. Ms. Basine?
Aye.
Ms. Campson?
Aye.
Mr. Clanton?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel?
Aye. Okay. We'll be back in about 5:55.